cross-cultural variations in attachment types. So this is a follow-on from the lesson that I set up the other day. And as you can see on the specification in bold, it's cultural variations in attachment, including Vannes and Dawn. You are going to need your booklet and potential pages out of the textbook for this. So first of all, some key terms. Here are 3 key terms that you should be familiar with: separation anxiety, stranger anxiety, and reunion behaviour. And we discussed all of these last week when we looked at the strange situation. So we're actually using the same controlled observation in order to explore cultural variations. So first, a word that you need to know, and you may be familiar with this, it's ethnocentrism. So if we just decode that word for a second, centrism is when you focus on something, so centric, egocentric. So this is ethnocentric. So this is where the focus is our own ethnicity. So this is the tendency to believe that your own ethnic or cultural group is centrally important and that other groups are measured in relation to your own. So to put it into easy words, basically, we believe our own ethnicity to be right and other people's not to be wrong, but we don't really understand it. So we are ethnocentric in that we view things from our own ethnic perspective. So for example, a good example of this would be not understanding people who don't celebrate Christmas, who don't put Christmas decorations up, etc. That's completely ethnocentric because putting up Christmas decorations is part of our culture. So I want you to think about in what way the strange situation could be seen to be ethnocentric. So first of all, think about the participants, so who was used, what's unique about them, and what makes that difficult to generalise in terms of ethnicity. And then think about the researcher, so where was she from? And what is the issue with that? And what is the problem with that? And she's probably going to impose her own ethnic and cultural beliefs on that research. And therefore, what conclusions can we draw because of this? So when you come to evaluate the strange situation, you can evaluate it because it is actually culturally biased and ethnocentric. We're now going to focus on a meta-analysis, which is the main cross-cultural study of attachment, which is named on the specification. And this is a meta-analysis of numerous strange situation experiments conducted in different countries. And I know it says experiments there, but that's just often a word that's used when people are talking about a meta-analysis, but they are controlled observations. So just to make it clear, Vannes and Dawn and Cronenberg have created a study where they've pulled together lots of other studies using the strange situation. So if you're not sure what a meta-analysis is, if you go and search on that now so that you get yourself a good definition of what one is. So Vannes and Dawn and Cronenberg, the aim of their research was to investigate the differences in attachment types and styles from a range of cultures. And remember, it is a meta-analysis, so they've not actually carried out a lot of the research themselves, and they've just looked at other people's research and then drawn conclusions from it. So what I want you to do now is go and have a look at the research by Vannes and Dawn and Cronenberg and note down exactly what they found. What did they do and what did they find? So Vannes and Dawn and Cronenberg, remember, have not carried out their own research, they've just looked at others. And when you look at these results, I would like you to look at what are the similarities between cultures and the differences between cultures. So the similarities within and between, and the differences within and between. So here are some of the findings of the research. So the first thing that I want to point out in terms of Vannes and Dawn and Cronenberg is that they compared lots of different countries, and if you look at the bottom of this chart you will see some of the countries that they compared, and the ones that I would like you to focus on are Germany, Israel, Japan and USA. Now you can use the others if you want to, but the reason we would look at those is probably because they have the most dramatic differences. You can look at the UK if you want to, because you can see that in the UK we have very high amounts of secure attachment and very, very low amounts of resistant. Right, so what we're going to do now, just to have a look at these results, what does this bar chart show? So it shows, if we look at the blue bars, first of all, that secure attachments are common across all cultures. So whether you're in Germany, Israel, Japan, USA or UK, secure is still the most common. We can see that China is a bit of an anomaly overall as a culture, but generally still secure attachments account for the majority in every culture. And then if you just have a look at the avoidant attachment, so we get higher amounts of avoidant attachment in Germany, USA and UK. Again, I'm going to leave China for the moment, to other cultures. And in Israel and Japan, they have very, very low amounts of avoidant attachment. Resistant attachment is almost non-existent in the UK and is very, very low in Germany, but it's much higher in Israel and Japan. So what I want you to do from that is to try to think why that might be. And so the similarities between cultures are secure attachments, but the differences are around avoidant and resistant. So why have we got such high levels of avoidant attachment in Germany, for example, but such low levels of resistant in Germany and the UK? And again, we've got to conclude that it comes down to differences in child rearing and parenting styles. So that's something that we're going to explore. What is it about children in Germany that makes them more avoidant? Now, avoidant children are associated, if you remember, with unresponsive care. So it's possible that we could conclude that in Germany, parents are perhaps harsher and leave their children a lot more to be independent and to self-soothe. Whereas if you have a look at Japan, there are no avoidant children hardly, well, less than 10% avoidant children. We would assume that there is a lot of very responsive and sensitive care in Japan. So very different in the way that children are brought up. So I just want you to look at that and see what conclusions you can draw from that. When you've looked at that, I want you to go through and have a look at the differences in sample size, because one of the things that you're going to find here with this is that the sample sizes used across these cultures are not comparable. So for example, there are a lot of studies from the USA, but not so many from other cultures. So why is that a problem, and how does that make it difficult to draw conclusions? So that's sample size. The next, I'd like you to consider the use of a meta-analysis. So if we go back to this again, Van Isendorn and Cronenberg aren't actually carrying out the study. And the problem with a meta-analysis is that all the studies that were used in this were perhaps all carried out differently and all potentially calculated quite differently. Did they measure the strange situation in exactly the same way? Did they look at children in exactly the same way? Did they observe in exactly the same way? So that's something that we perhaps need to consider with that. Ethnocentricity. Again, for all of those studies, what were the cultural backgrounds of the researchers? What were their ethnic origins? And how would that potentially have affected the research? Again, what are the effects of the media? So obviously we've got, in certain cultures, the media promoting certain parenting types, and how could that potentially affect the outcome of the research? The other thing is, sometimes if you have a look at the actual raw data on the table, you'll find that there are bigger differences within a culture than between cultures. So for example, if you look at the USA, there are lots of differences across the USA. Likewise, in Japan, there are quite big differences, and in particular in the UK, a multicultural society, we are going to have quite a lot of differences between cultures. So, if we just go through this, the influence of culture, most of the experiments did take place in a very westernised culture, and there are big differences in child rearing practices. I would like you now to just have a look at this additional piece of research by McMahon, which is looking at the mother-infant attachment amongst the Dogon people of Mali. And this is looking at basically different attachment styles. And the idea of this is just to raise your awareness. It's not a study that you necessarily need, but just to raise your awareness of the different attachment styles. So for example, constantly keeping the infants close, breastfeeding on demand, and responding immediately are very different from a British child rearing practice. And therefore, what's interesting here is that if you're looking at a study that focuses mainly on British Western cultural practices, it's very difficult for us to compare against a study like this, which is a completely different culture. So what I would like you to do now is to have a look and make sure that you've got some research to support cross-cultural variations in attachment. This has been quite a brief lesson, and that's because I want you to do a lot of the reading for this yourself. So I'm going to show you where you can find this reading to support this. So if we have a look now, I have attached this onto the shared area in, I'm just trying to find it, the shared area on Teams. And if I can just locate it here, we've actually got this, which should help you a little bit more when it opens. Here it is. I need to just make it a little bit smaller. But this is actually taken from one of the textbooks. If I can just open this here for you. Let's just get rid of that and see if we can. Right, I'll try and make it a little bit bigger here for you. So if you notice here, we've got a little bit about Van Isendorn's study here. So we've got a meta-analysis of 26 studies. There's Van Isendorn's study in 8 countries. They looked at 32 studies in 8 different countries, and it suggests that cultural practices have little influence on attachment behaviour and does generally support the idea that attachment is an innate and universal process. And that's because of the secure attachments. But of course, I want you to consider the problems when we looked at the insecure attachment styles for that. So if we just go over here, we've got another study which is by Tronick, which I would like you to look at. And this was carried out in Zaire, and this is looking at African tribes. And again, I'd like you to consider what the differences are in this and how this might help us draw conclusions on cross-cultural differences. Another piece of research that you might find interesting is, if I can just try and get this, well, if you can search on it yourself, we'll look at this one actually. This one by Ainsworth is the original piece of research. Remember, you can actually use that as well. If we go to your booklet, so we actually open up your attachment booklet here, and we go down to where we've got, sorry, just bear with me while I pull this down to get to, here we go. So if you can turn to around page 30, 32, 33, we've got the study here by Van Isendorn and Cronenberg, and this is the detail of the study. As you can see, there is very little in terms of procedure because it's a meta-analysis. There is always very little procedure when it's a meta-analysis. And there are the results. And this is something that you're going to use, particularly for evaluation. The number of studies used, if you have to see in the USA, there are a lot more. And we've got some of the numerical findings there that you might need. And again, there is the findings are put into words there, and we've got some of the conclusions underneath. This is the study the other study that I would like you to focus on, which is Takahashi, and it's looking at Japanese infants. And the reason I would like you to look at this is because I think this provides a more detailed explanation of why the attachment styles are so different in Japan, because it talks about the different child rearing practices. And incidentally, this study had to be stopped because it was so distressing for the children, because the Japanese child rearing practices are so different. There are then some evaluation points. I apologise, it says AO2 there, it should say AO3. So I'll go ahead and change that for you. The methodology used, again, we've got a nice appeal point there about the methodology that's been used. And then we've got a appeal point there, even though what the textbook did tell us that it was a valid measure. Remember, everything is open for discussion in psychology, and we could argue that overall it's not a valid measure for all cultures. What we can say is that a secure attachment clearly exists in all cultures, and therefore the secure attachment could be quite universal. But one of the problems here is that the strange situation as a method of assessment is not really an appropriate measure to use in every culture. And again, one of the problems with this is that it largely fails to consider different subcultures within cultures. So what I would like you to do is make sure that you've got some notes on this. If there are any queries on this, as always, please come back to me, and I will do another video where I'm further evaluating these studies for you. Thank you.